The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Donald Trump's convicted personal attorney, Michael Cohen, has been testifying for hours. Maybe by the time you watch this, maybe by the time you listen to this, it will be over. I have not missed a minute of it up until I came into the studio to start working on today's program. Michael Cohen came in armed with documents and exhibits to support his claims about the criminality of President Donald Trump. Off the top, we were told that there would be a sort of limited scope to avoid questions related to collusion with Russia, which didn't seem like it would allow for too much discussion about that. But fortunately, because Michael Cohen included some of those elements in his opening testimony anyway, there actually have been a fair number of questions related to Russia. It doesn't look good, and we're going to get to that. But if you watched the beginning of it, 15 minutes were devoted solely to Republican objections that there should even be testimony. Republicans tried to use procedural rules and technicalities to prevent the testimony from even happening. I mean, desperate to prevent Michael Cohen from testifying. That went on 10 or 15 minutes before the event even got going. And then Michael Cohen launched into his opening statement, which was filled, absolutely filled with extraordinary bombshells, the truth of which we'll talk about in a moment, right? Whether people believe Michael Cohen is a separate question. But some of what Michael Cohen talked about in that opening statement includes he regrets working for Donald Trump and having done what he did. Okay, I think anybody would say that in his position. He openly calls Trump a racist, a con man, and a cheat, and then backs it up. And importantly, right off the bat, Michael Cohen confirms that individual number one in documents related to Cohen's indictments is indeed Donald Trump. He says that Donald Trump knew Roger Stone was talking to Julian Assange of WikiLeaks and knew in advance of when DNC email drops, which had been illegally hacked, were going to be released. This directly contradicts known statements from multiple people. An absolute bombshell that Donald Trump knew about this ahead of time. This was denied time and time and time again. Michael Cohen told the story of being in Donald Trump's office when Roger Stone called on speakerphone and told Trump, I just got off the phone with Julian Assange. In a few days, there's going to be this massive email dump of Hillary Clinton's emails. And Trump responded that it would be great, according to Michael Cohen, which means that indeed Michael Cohen is testifying that Donald Trump was involved in the release of the emails, which he made a big deal about during the campaign as a campaign issue against Hillary Clinton. Michael Cohen talks about having a check, which he brought as evidence, written by Donald Trump from Trump's personal account after Trump became president to reimburse Cohen for the hush money payments. That's a bombshell. Cohen has multiple copies of these checks cut to him by Trump while Trump is president to repay him for the illegal hush money payments for which Cohen is going to prison. That's a really important point. Cohen is convicted and is going to prison for the hush money payments, which Donald Trump paid him back for during the presidency of Donald Trump. Cohen describes talking to Trump, going to the Oval Office, and Trump saying, hey, those next two payments are on their way. They're being sent in from New York, and it takes a while for them to work their way through the White House mail system. Cohen presented financial statements of Donald Trump's given to banks like Deutsche Bank, which is a bank at the center of this investigation, talks about misuse of donated funds, handwritten notes showing that Donald Trump arranged, and this is so narcissistic as it is disgusting and corrupt and a misuse of donated money. Trump arranged for a straw buyer to go to an auction and buy a portrait of Trump to go up in one of Trump's golf clubs, as we've previously reported, which Donald Trump later reimbursed with donated funds meant to be charitable contributions. And then Cohen also gets into what we now know is the truth about Trump Tower Moscow, which is that negotiations were taking place about Trump Tower Moscow during the campaign. And what this means is that you simultaneously had Russia trying to help Donald Trump defeat Hillary Clinton, and at that same time, you had Donald Trump negotiating to build Trump Tower Moscow. There were plans. A builder had been lined up. There was the idea of giving Vladimir Putin a $50 million penthouse as a sort of sweetener to make the building more appealing to other oligarchs. And Cohen, interestingly, in the midst of all this, explained how Trump tells him to lie. He says Trump doesn't show up and say, go and lie. Trump shows up and looks at him and says, there's no business in Russia, Michael. There's no business in Russia. And it's a sort of wink, wink for Michael Cohen to go out there and to say what Trump knows is a lie and what Cohen knows is a lie and what everybody knows is a lie, which is that there actually is business in Russia. This is how a mob boss operates. Meanwhile, according to Michael Cohen, Trump would ask him regularly, how's it going in Russia? How's it going in Russia? Because everybody knew that there was business going on in Russia. That's not a question, especially when you ask it 6 times, that suggests Trump is unconcerned with what's going on in Russia or that Trump isn't aware or involved in any of it. Racism. Cohen says Trump told him black people would never vote for him because they were too stupid. Cohen says Trump regularly inflated his assets to be listed as wealthier on the Forbes list, exactly as we suspected, and might explain why Trump is desperate for his tax returns not to become public. Cohen explained that Trump directed him to threaten lawsuits against Trump's schools if they ever disclosed his grades or SAT scores because they're terrible. And when it comes to Russia, Cohen says he doesn't have proof, but he has suspicions. And he actually tells the story of a time shortly before the Trump Tower meeting took place when he was in Trump's office and in comes Donald Trump Jr. and walks right behind Trump's desk, something that people would rarely do, and leans in close and says quietly but loud enough for Michael Cohen to hear that the meeting is all set, and Trump says, okay, good, let me know. Michael Cohen now believes that that was indeed when Donald Trump was being told that a meeting with Russian actors meant to provide dirt on Hillary Clinton had been arranged, had been confirmed, and would be taking place. Again, direct contradiction of what Donald Trump previously said. We were told by Trump and attorneys and all sorts of people that Trump had no idea whatsoever about it. Of course, the more we learn, the more we realize that nothing goes on around Trump without Donald Trump's specific involvement. And Michael Cohen testified to that as well today. Okay, so what are going to be the reactions to this? Republicans, as I mentioned, went in ready with attack questions and just trying to attack Michael Cohen's credibility as someone who can't be believed. Michael Cohen is simply saying, yes, I did lie before, and I'm going to prison for it, and I take responsibility. He's there voluntarily. It would be extraordinarily boneheaded. I mean, Paul Manafort did it, but it would be extraordinarily boneheaded at this point to voluntarily put yourself under oath and tell lies that you know are going to be scrutinized and could lead to even more significant jail time, prison time, etc. So on the one hand, playing it conservatively, if only 5% of what Michael Cohen says and has said today is true, it is a blockbuster of absolutely historic proportions. That being said, I don't think he's going in there and lying. And again, there's not really anything he's embellishing on. You can believe that he's straight up making everything up whole cloth, right? But he's asked questions. He answers them in verifiable ways. You can go and check whether what he says is or isn't part of the record as he claims it to be. And if we're going to use past lies as a barometer for determining whether someone can be believed in the future, Donald Trump has told, according to different trackers, anywhere between 8,000 and 12,000 lies as president of the United States. If we can't believe Michael Cohen ever again because he said some things that weren't true to investigators, then we can never believe another word of anything that Donald Trump says. And it's funny, I mentioned that to my audience. A lot of people in my audience already don't believe anything that Donald Trump says. So the next steps will be testimony will finish. More Democrats and Republicans will get the opportunity to ask Michael Cohen questions. Then we will see the spin cycle on the news tonight. I may do a YouTube live stream talking about some of the reaction. Democrats likely will say this points to specific criminality by Donald Trump. That needs to be further investigated and dug into in specific detail. New investigations are necessary. We need to call more witnesses to testify before the House Oversight Committee. Republicans are going to say, we can't believe this guy. This is a bad guy. This is a convicted felon. And there's nothing to see here. And ultimately, it's going to come down to Cohen's credibility and what impact this has on other investigations that are taking place. But to me, Michael Cohen is a guy who at this point has no reason to lie and has a lot to lose if he's willing to show up, be sworn in, and under oath say things that are demonstrably untrue. And I think we will find out over time that today he told the truth. Whether consequences will come of it, whether there will be any willingness by the Republicans to say, you know what, we've got to put party aside and we have to take this seriously because it is serious. This is the crisis, not what's going on at the U.S.-Mexico border. Then maybe we will actually see consequences or the potential of consequences. Otherwise, I would not be holding my breath. Let me know on Twitter what you make of the testimony, whether you think it will have any actual material impact on the future of Donald Trump's presidency. I'm skeptical, but I'm willing to have my mind changed. On Twitter at @DPacman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Let me say a quick thank you to Cameron Llewellyn, who is today's new member of the day. Cameron, really appreciate your support, appreciate the support of lots of the people who have signed up for free and at discounted rates, thanks to All-Star member contributor Joshua. Still a few memberships remaining if people want to get in touch. Lance Lawson is today's All-Star sustaining member of the day. He's been with us nearly 5 years. Cameron and Lance, thank you so much. Sign up for membership at www.joinpakman.com. More than 500 new members already in this very, very early 2019. Off to just an amazing start. Thank you. I mean, it's really been flattering, the amount of support growth that we've seen so far this year. And no better time for it than when we are launching the show on WCPT in Chicago. Hello to everyone listening in Chicago. Today's our first day on the air with you guys. And also upcoming DCTV television in Washington, D.C., the nation's capital. All really, really great stuff. Let's get into this week's Hatriot Mail. Hatriot Mail is when a professional voiceover artist interprets hate mail that I get. Quick reminder of what it sounds like, just to get everybody on the same page.
Because we don't care about liberal cucks so much that we spend our time writing to them. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
So with most Hatriot Mails, there's sort of a balance. It's a kind of seesaw between, on the one hand, absolutely incredible hate and ignorance, and on the other hand, atrocious spelling and grammar. And you don't usually get one Hatriot Mail where both are really, really bad. This is an exception. Today's Hatriot Mail is extraordinarily hateful and disturbing, and also just riddled with bizarre spelling and grammar mistakes.
Parkmanis of repotting before you have facts. I lost respect for you. You are all about rantings because rantings means money. More BS from Pakman. You are a cuckolded twit. You've totally lost my support on all platforms.
I love that. You've lost my support on all platforms. They're going further than merely saying they are unsubscribing or they will never listen to the podcast again. Every single platform. Instagram, this Hatriot is gone. Twitter, we're never going to hear from this Hatriot again. Facebook page has been unliked. And by the way, what on earth does it mean Parkman is of repotting. It seems like Packman is reporting, maybe, I don't even really know what this person means, but atrocious spelling, atrocious grammar, and of course, the hate that we've come to know and expect in all Hatriot mails. But you are not impotent against the Hatriots. There's a coupon code, Hatriot40, Hatriot 40, which will allow you to save 40% off of any membership at www.joinpacman.com. When you use the coupon code Hatriot40, you save 40%, and thousands of Hatriots cry because their efforts to destroy the David Pakman Show are not functioning, and that is a good thing for everybody on the side of logic and reason. We've talked before about this disgusting Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz from Florida. He is a brown-nosing Trump sycophant of the highest order, real piece of work. One of the most pro-gun people in the House of Representatives. He tried to get Robert Mueller recused from the investigation that Mueller was running. That didn't work. He supports Trump's tax cuts as a matter of economics. He disagrees with the science on climate change. He's been arrested for drunk driving on the personal side. So this guy's a real piece of work and someone that is truly an enemy to everything that someone who cares about the United States of America should be advocating for. He should be voted out ASAP, regardless of what he did yesterday. But that gets us to what he did yesterday. Matt Gaetz tweeted on the eve of Michael Cohen's absolutely bombshell testimony today about Donald Trump. Hey, Michael Cohen, do your wife and father-in-law know about your girlfriends? Maybe tonight would be a good time for that chat. I wonder if she'll remain faithful when you're in prison. She's about to learn a lot. Now, Gaetz has since deleted this tweet after Nancy Pelosi knocked him around verbally, proverbially speaking, so to speak, and with words, not physically. But we were able to obtain the tweet anyway, thanks to the magic of the internet. And the obvious interpretation of what Matt Gaetz is saying here is Michael Cohen and Matt Gaetz should talk tonight, meaning last night, before Cohen testifies, unless Cohen wants information released about, I guess, girlfriends or mistresses to his wife and father-in-law. So this is a threat. This is a threat of blackmail, and it appears to be illegal because there's this thing in the 18 USC subsection 1512B, specifically, not A but B, which prohibits tampering with witnesses to official proceedings, which is exactly what Michael Cohen is today as he testifies before the House committee. If we put up section 1512B of this U.S. law, Code of Justice, it says, whoever knowingly uses intimidation, threatens, or corruptly persuades another person or attempts to do so, or engages in misleading conduct toward another person, that means whether the threats of exposing mistresses are real or not, if the intent is to influence, delay, or prevent the testimony of any person in an official proceeding, or to cause or induce any person to withhold testimony or withhold a record or a document from an official proceeding, or to alter, destroy, mutilate, or conceal an object with intent to impair the object's integrity or availability for use in a public proceeding, this would all be against the law, as subsection 3 or portion 3, I don't know even how to call these nested provisions. If the idea is to hinder, delay, or prevent the communication to law enforcement officers or judges of the U.S. relating to the commission or possible commission of federal offenses, like the things Cohen is alleging Trump did, that person shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 20 years or both. Now, of course, Matt Gaetz is not going to be imprisoned for this. He is not going to be fined for this, but there is the significant possibility that there will be a House ethics investigation into it. But this is pretty clear. It totally imploded in Gaetz's face. He first responded, he's not tampering with witnesses by saying this. He's testing witnesses. He's testing, I guess he claims, Michael Cohen's character and veracity of his claims by threatening him with the revelation of girlfriends of his to his wife and father-in-law. Now, as I mentioned, Gaetz later deleted the tweet. He realized it was a disastrous idea after Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, completely crushed him for it. She put out a statement saying, "I encourage all members to be mindful that comments made on social media or in the press can adversely affect the ability of House committees to obtain the truthful and complete information necessary to fulfill their duties." And Matt Gaetz, not long after that, quoted Nancy Pelosi's tweet and said, "Speaker, I want to get to the truth too. While it is important to create context around the testimony of liars like Michael Cohen, it was not my intent to threaten, as some believe I did. I'm deleting the tweet, and I should have chosen words that better showed my intent. I'm sorry." Oh, no, he chose words that very precisely indicated what his intent was. His intent was to dissuade Michael Cohen from giving the testimony that he gave today on the basis that Gaetz would expose alleged affairs, girlfriends of Michael Cohen's to Michael Cohen's family. And of course, he's trying to save face here while deleting this total train wreck of a tweet. And there's a couple of things here. I also mentioned that Gaetz is unlikely to face consequences here in general, but there's a more important reason why Gaetz is unlikely to face consequences. Trump has done much worse witness intimidation and tampering on Twitter. If you go after Gaetz for this, you sort of have to go after Trump too, or it will expose that he's getting special treatment and getting away with it, since what Donald Trump has done in terms of witness intimidation and witness tampering is way worse than what Matt Gaetz attempted to do here. The other thing is, do we really believe that Matt Gaetz came up with this all by himself? Or is it more likely that this threat from Gaetz is actually a threat from Trump via proxy? Because after all, that's what Trump is known for. And I spoke to some lawyers this morning who said if they, like, not if they were high-powered elected officials or involved in something like this, but if they just had a regular client, a Joe Schmo, who went on Twitter after doing this, they would be advising them, you should be prepared to be arrested by police, period, because this is so far over the line. This is so far beyond the pale. But of course, with Republican congressmen who are friends and surrogates of Donald Trump in some implicit or explicit way, he deleted the tweet. What else can we do? He also apologized to Nancy Pelosi and said that his choice of words was wrong. Conduct completely unbecoming an elected official and a so-called distinguished gentleman of the House of Representatives. In the midst of 20 scandals a week, there will probably be no consequences whatsoever. But if we're lucky, maybe we'll get at least some kind of investigation into this that will, if nothing else, prevent Gaetz from doing even dumber things while that investigation is going on. Make sure you're following the show on Instagram at David Pakman Show. We will take a break. Part 2 of my interview with Cass Sunstein is coming up next.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
We're continuing our conversation today with professor at Harvard Law School, Cass Sunstein. The new book out yesterday is called On Freedom. Cass, I think a great place for us to go next is to start getting into what the involvement of government should be in guaranteeing or fomenting the type of freedom that you're describing as sort of essential for humans in 2019 today. So let's sort of start there. I mean, I think a lot of people will probably be familiar with your sort of political background. What is the strongest defense, legally speaking, for government involvement in ensuring the type of freedom and degree of freedom that you advocate for in the book?
I'd use some word softer than guarantee and certainly softer than fomenting, more promoting. And the strongest argument is that if the government is providing information to people, it can save lives. So to provide information about risks associated with, let's say, distracted driving, it's not an extremely expensive intervention. It's certainly a freedom-promoting intervention. And we had in the United States in recent years over 35,000 people die on the highways. Those people don't want to die. They may be making foolish choices, but in some cases they don't have the equivalent, let's say, of a safety GPS. And if the government has clarity, such as the seatbelt program, the very successful seatbelt programs, and it applies that to distracted driving as well, we'll have fewer dead people, and people will be making their ways in a way that is freer, in the sense that their choices will be more informed. And that's a positive thing for government to be doing. In the area of health generally, to have cigarette warnings of the sort we've had are freedom promoting. I would want more aggressive warnings. That it seems as if the current ones are a little too anodyne, that is boring, and they don't attract attention well enough. But a more vigorous warning probably save lives. We have 400,000 people dying. To help people overcome addiction and opioid use would be freedom promoting. People who are getting into opioids often are insufficiently informed. There's a role for government in combating those risks. It can do it by helping people not to start in the first place with warnings and with maybe smaller prescriptions in the first instance. So instead of getting 40 pills, you get 10. That's likely to make a dent, at least in the opioid addiction problem. With respect to environmental risks involving air pollution, information of the sort which government often promotes access to about how the air is these days can be both helpful for people who have asthma problems and worse, and helpful for the private sector as a way of promoting reductions. So the kinds of tools we're talking about, which involve, in the case of savings, defaulting people into savings programs, saying you're free to opt out, but you're automatically in. Government has incentivized that. Having information environments where people have clarity about what they're getting and not. So our Consumer Bureau has had a mantra, know before you owe. I think that's a really good one. If you owe without knowing, you're a little trapped, and if you're trapped, you're not so free.
So let's go a little further into some that might get a little more disagreement based on one's sort of political orientation. Let's talk about health, for example. When we think about initiatives to guarantee health care to everybody, regardless of ability to pay, you have one side, which I am sensitive to, sympathetic to, which is that to truly be free and to be able to pursue what it is that you want to do, you need to have access to at least some level of health care. If you are unable to get that care, that's going to restrict your freedom. On the other side, you have people who say, well, as soon as you mandate payroll taxes for example, employees and employers in order to get people that health care, you are taking away some degree of freedom from those employees and employers to decide what to do with the money that they make. How do we start to unpack that and find what the balance is?
Okay, so what On Freedom is about is what I regard as the great neglected component of freedom that lawyers, my own people, economists, philosophers, political scientists, and all of us thinking about freedom have neglected, which is the problem of navigability. And I don't love that word because it has too many syllables, but it's instructive in suggesting that if you don't know how to get where you want to go, you are to that extent less free. And that people whose children suffer from health problems, including mental health, for people who are suffering economically, they want training or they want education. The problem of navigability is often obstacle number one. So that's what I want to put a spotlight on. The more ambitious claim that you've raised, which is that if you don't have access to the healthcare system because you're poor or something, you're unfree, or that there should be an employer mandate in order to promote freedom on the part, let's say, of those who otherwise are deprived of access to health care, have a deprivation of freedom. I have, for present purposes, nothing to say about that debate. It's an honor in ways I think we haven't yet, while saying, let's bracket that one.
Can we maybe zoom out a bit then and think about conceptually the idea of positive and negative freedoms in this conversation? The idea of where we kind of couch the debate about freedom to do something, and when that starts to impinge on freedom from something for somebody else. I mean, I think the debate that fortunately now is a little bit less timely than it was 5 years ago about religious freedom versus freedom to discriminate against people on the basis of a perceived or real LGBT status, which is an interesting freedom to and freedom from discussion. Where do you draw the line there?
Well, if you have someone who is unable to find her way, let's say, to job training, which she badly wants, then I say there's an obstacle to freedom. You can say that the absence of navigability is an insult to positive freedom, that she's making a claim on someone's resources to find a route. That's fair, I think. Whether it's right, I'm not completely sure, but it's not obviously not right. So insofar as we say that helping people find a route to their preferred destination calls for a form of positive freedom, I don't have a particular complaint, but I'm not sure it's true, because if someone can't find their way to their preferred destination, their negative freedom may be interfered with depending on what the obstacle exactly is and who's putting it there. So you can see the claim, that is, and it's an unusual claim. So the reason I did the book is that I want to say something that's not been said 1,000 times before. The claim is that the navigation problem is a freedom problem. There's a debate about which there are many thousands of pages spilled probably every month, which is about the most of them, thank goodness, are not published, about the positive and negative freedom debate. My view about that is that it has a large semantic dimension, which makes it less interesting, where the advocates of positive freedom claim freedom entails a right to things, and the advocates of negative freedom say freedom entails a right of freedom from impositions of various sorts. This, on my view, has a definitional character, which means what's underlying it substantively is not that clear. Clearly, the friends of positive freedom say this is a good thing, and the friends of negative freedom are not that excited about positive freedom. But they can't. The friends of negative freedom can't earn the victory by stamping on the ground and saying that's not freedom. They have to earn the victory by saying that a society ought not to be providing those things because those societies are poorer, less prosperous, there's less liberty of the kind they value. And then we're talking about substance rather than, that is about what society should look like, rather than about the meaning of terms.
When we think about any restriction on freedom, how should we, or to what degree should we be considering the possible negative externalities of such a decision beyond sort of, as you say, the specific substance of a decision?
Okay, so there's a view, let's call it 2018, which is that a restriction on freedom consists of blocking people, let's say through force, from getting where they want to go.
Sure.
That's inadequate. There's 2019 view is that if people can't find their way to the place where they want to go, either because of some literal obstacle to acquiring the knowledge or because of some access to the relevant information problem, they are to that extent unfree. And for people who suffer from addictions, this is particularly clear. And there's a lot of talk on the part of alcoholics and drug addicts that they are enslaved. And I think that's fair. That's what the experience is like. They need something that will liberate them. Okay, 2019 talk. Back to 2018, there's a view that well precedes 2018 that if you are imposing harm on others, there's a legitimate basis for interference with your, let's say, 2018 freedom. And that goes back to John Stuart Mill, who was a libertarian of a sort, and who believes with modern day libertarians that if you are engaging in behavior that imposes harm to others, then it's okay to do something. It might be a corrective tax, it may be a fine, it might be a law, and I have no problem with that. I think that is correct. I would add only that, and the book does touch lightly on this, that in cases in which an individual is imposing harms on his or her future self of a certain magnitude, and it's really clear, then the argument for coercion needs to be explored. I think explored with skepticism, but explored. So if you have someone, let's say, who's buying appliances that are relatively cheap, but they're going to cost them a whole lot over the lifetime of the use of the expenditure, we wouldn't put them in jail or fine them for that, but there might be an argument for energy efficiency standards, which will move the market in directions that will help consumers over the long term. I don't want to say that the argument for energy efficiency standards is airtight, but in principle, it's an empirical question in large part, and it's worth exploring.
The book is called On Freedom. We've been speaking with the book's author, Cass Sunstein, professor at Harvard Law School. We are linking in the description for the YouTube video for the interview directly to the book. Cass, thank you so much for joining me today. Really a pleasure.
Thank you. Great pleasure.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So Monday night, Bernie Sanders did a town hall event, 1 hour long, on CNN. A number of different presidential candidates have been doing them so far. And in general, there's always sort of a discussion, and people end up unhappy about who gets to ask questions at these events. And at this particular town hall, there's more anger than usual because the assertion is that a lot of the people who got to ask questions weren't accurately represented as the political operatives or lobbyist associated individuals that they were. So I'm going to lay out the facts here, and then we can kind of think through what the implications are, whether we should be upset and at whom. Because originally the claim was all of these secret operatives were planted in order to make Bernie look bad. But it actually seems to be a little bit more nuanced than that. So we get to Bernie's town hall. And I'll go through a few of these examples. And at one point, a young woman gets up to ask a question about sexual harassment not being taken seriously by Bernie Sanders during his 2016 campaign. And the question was very scripted, which is fine. People tend to plan their questions out ahead of time, and then CNN decides who gets to ask them. But what people are upset about is that the woman was identified as an American university student, when in fact, although that appears to be true, she's also an intern at a Washington, D.C. lobbying firm named Cassidy & Associates. Her name is Shadi Nassab. Check out the question. Check out just a little bit of Bernie's answer.
So we have a question from Shadi Nassab, a student at American University. Shadi's from Denver.
As we saw in the 2018 midterms, the Democratic Party has become more female, more racially diverse, and younger in age. How can a voter like me feel confident in your ability to represent the party, especially given that your response to sexual harassment allegations during your campaign is that you were, quote, a little bit busy running around the country trying to make the case to be elected as president?
Well, I think that quote was a little bit out of context. But let me ask you a question. I am enormously proud of the fact that we have the most diverse, progressive freshman class in the history of the United States Congress. And you know what I did in 2016? And in 2018, I ran all over this country to try to make that happen. All right. So when you talk about the political revolution, you're talking about two things. Number one are the ideas that we are fighting for. An economy that works for all, not just the 1%. But the second point that I have made over and over again is we're not going to be able to implement a progressive agenda unless millions more people get involved in the political process.
Yeah, so Bernie answers it perfectly well. He then goes on to say it was very painful that those allegations were made. Okay. Very quickly, people started looking around and saying, okay, Shadi Nassab, it says on CNN that she's an American university student. Turns out she's a public policy intern at this lobbyist, Cassidy and Associates. And people were able to confirm this by looking at her LinkedIn. Cassidy and Associates is an establishment DC lobbying firm. It's connected to Democratic Minority Leader Harry Reid's former deputy chief of staff, former minority leader who's currently the CEO. They worked for the Egyptian government to improve Egypt's image in the U.S. after news of Egyptian human rights abuses surfaced. They were actually sort of involved in a number of different political issues. And the argument was, this is a plant from an establishment firm to smear Bernie with this question. But it's not totally clear that that's what it was. The other argument that has been made is this was someone who simply teed up for Bernie a really great opportunity to deal with the sexual assault, sexual harassment allegations. So the question really for me is, are these individuals being presented in the way that most reflects their presence at the town hall? I'll give you some other examples of this. Here's one other one. Tara Ebersole, okay? Tara Ebersole was listed as a former biology professor when she asked a question. If you look at her LinkedIn profile, yes, she used to be a biology professor, but right now she's the chair of the Baltimore County Democratic Party. She's a political operative. She's not just some random former biology professor. Now, does that tell us whether her presence is in order to antagonize Bernie from an establishment point of view or to help Bernie? No, it doesn't. It just tells us that the room is filled with political operatives rather than just random disinterested voters other than wanting to figure out who to vote for. Another example, a woman named Avina McAllister. Avina McAllister presented as a mother of two. And I'm sure she is a mother of two, but according to the Charles County Democratic Central Committee website, she is a Democratic committee member. She has a formal position within a local Democratic Party. And I could go on and on and on. There's a whole long list of these. So the question is, what does it matter? What does it matter? Initially, the allegation was CNN participated in stacking the room with anti-Bernie people to smear him. Then people started thinking a little bit more in a nuanced way about this. And what is the most likely scenario to me, Pat, and you tell me if you disagree, is that anytime there's one of these town halls, everybody who has an interest, and that is going to be disproportionately political groups, political operatives, lobbyists, etc., they try to get their people in the room. Obviously, they would try to do that. So I think that if anybody is at fault here, it's number one, CNN for maybe not doing enough to get actual just regular voters in the room. And number two, the titles that these people were assigned, I think, are deceptive.
I totally agree. I blame CNN not getting the right titles, or at least the appropriate titles. And I think we are on edge here, and we have the right to be, because Bernie Sanders was screwed in 2016, not just by the DNC, but also by the establishment media, right? They didn't cover his rallies at the beginning. They didn't cover his campaign. Meanwhile, they were covering Donald Trump's empty podium and, had plenty of interest in Hillary Clinton. So we don't want to see that happen again in 2020.
No. And I think a lot of the discussion about this is wrongly about debating the merits of a question about sexual assault, because as soon as you argue that this was a planted shill from a lobbying group to smear Bernie about sexual assault, you then have to defend that the sexual assault question is not valid. And while I agree that Shadi Nassab's framing was not a complete framing, sexual assault in campaigns, particularly if you're talking about women's rights and gender equality, it's a perfectly legitimate question. So for me, it's less about pointing to that question as a smear or a softball. I don't know exactly what that particular lobbying firm's interests are in this election. They may well be establishment and they may be trying to hurt Bernie or not. I just don't know. We don't know exactly what their role is right now. This is sort of breaking news. How candidates deal with sexual assault matters. The question was incorrectly framed. Bernie Sanders answered the question to the best of his ability. Overall, what we have to understand is that this is calculated theater for television, and the sources that have money are going to disproportionately have control over the discourse. That's really the message. CNN has an interest in selecting from the questions that are submitted the ones that they think are going to be most interesting and relevant. And case in point, this question from a lobbyist intern was selected to be clipped separately on CNN's website. So CNN has a role to play. Lobbying groups and Democratic Party groups and others know what types of questions are more likely to be selected. So this is a sort of systemic reality, and focusing on this one question is relevant, but I think it misses the bigger point. There were lots of fluff softballs during Kamala Harris's town hall. Many of them were sort of out of context or lacking criticism. Does that mean that the entire thing was designed to prop up Kamala Harris? Maybe, if you believe that the DNC has already sort of selected her, but it could very much be more a reflection of the mechanisms that lead to what questions are written down by people and how CNN selects them. I think what we can all come away with and agree upon is that a 1-hour town hall, which with such carefully curated questions and no real opportunity for a back and forth, doesn't really give us too much of an opportunity to learn about the candidate. That's my main complaint. Okay, so we've been watching convicted Trump personal attorney Michael Cohen's testimony today. Might still be going on now, might be over by the time you watch the show or listen to today's show. And a frequent question that I've been getting on Twitter since Michael Cohen started testifying was, there's all this general talk about, oh, Trump's involved in criminality. Michael Cohen's exposing Trump's involvement in criminality. What's the actual list of crimes? What crimes may have Donald Trump actually committed? Let's dig into exactly that question right now. Let's start with campaign finance, okay? Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington looked specifically at campaign finance crimes. They identified 8 possible criminal offenses by Donald Trump, 7 of which are felonies, okay? These are, and we'll put them up on the screen for our audience, causing AMI to make and or accepting or causing his then lawyer Michael Cohen to accept unlawful corporate contributions related to Karen McDougal. That's one of the things that Michael Cohen has been convicted of. 2 instances of causing Michael Cohen to make and or accepting an unlawful individual contributions related to Stephanie Clifford, also known as Stormy Daniels. That is also something Michael Cohen has pled guilty to. 2 instances of causing Donald J. Trump for President LLC's failure to report contributions from AMI and Cohen related to McDougal and Clifford. These are all campaign finance violations. And then you see this other list, causing Donald J. Trump for President LLC to file false reports with the FEC, making a false statement by failing to disclose liability to Cohen for the Clifford payment on his 2017 financial disclosure. We've talked about that before. Conspiracy to defraud the United States. Okay, so these are just the possible crimes related to campaign finance. Then, before we move on, I should say, if anyone's going to argue Trump doesn't know anything about campaign finance, well, Trump has been saying for years, including as far back as 1999, that no one knows more about campaign finance laws than him, and he knows exactly how to use campaign finance laws to get politicians to do his bidding, and that makes him smart, knowing how to use the system. It's hyperbolic to say no one knows more than him, but it's hard to plead ignorance to campaign finance when you claimed knowledge of it, expert knowledge, many times before. So then we get on to other crimes above and beyond the 8 campaign finance crimes, 7 of which are felonies that I just listed for you. We get to obstruction of justice. Obstruction of justice could include the firing of James Comey to interfere with the Russia investigation. It can include directing Matthew Whitaker to install a Trump crony to oversee particular SDNY investigations into Donald Trump and others. I mean, there's so many examples of obstruction of justice that I can't even go through all of them today. Witness tampering. Witness tampering can include Donald Trump's conversations with Michael Cohen before different testimony and meetings with investigators and House committees, that is. Paul Manafort. We have reason to believe that Donald Trump engaged in witness tampering related to Paul Manafort and others. Okay, so witness tampering is the next umbrella. And then this is a really interesting one. Lying to investigators and lying to the FBI under oath. Here's what I mean by that. When Donald Trump was asked questions which he responded to in writing by Robert Mueller's investigators, those responses were considered under oath testimony. In the same way that if he sat in person with those investigators and he lied, that is lying to federal investigators. Based on Michael Cohen's testimony today about a number of different things, it is very possible, we don't know this yet, but we may learn about it. It is very possible that some of the written answers that Donald Trump submitted directly contradict what Michael Cohen testified to under oath today. This could be related to Trump's knowledge of and involvement in the Trump Tower, not Trump Tower, Moscow, the New York City Trump Tower meeting with the Russian lawyer for dirt on Hillary. This could relate to Trump's claims about his involvement and awareness related to Trump Tower Moscow plans. If Trump submitted in writing under oath one perspective on that, and now Michael Cohen under oath is saying the opposite, someone is lying. They can't both be true. It can't both be true that Trump had no knowledge in advance of the meeting with Natalia Veselnitskaya and that Donald Trump Jr. came in and told him the meeting had been set and Trump said, okay, that's good to hear. Somebody's not telling the truth there. And if Trump said the former in his written submission to Robert Mueller, we're also talking about a crime for which other people wrapped up in this thing so far are going to be doing time. So this is just the beginning of the list of possible crimes, and there's already a lot of them. And I know I'm missing some, but we have limited time, and the potential crimes of the president at this point are great. So that's as far as we're going to go with the list today. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. Here's a good question. When has a politician evolved? When has a politician merely flip-flopped?
Hi, David. It's Tom. I'm from Phoenix, Arizona, although originally from California, and I was wondering your position on whether someone is, quote-unquote, evolving on an issue or whether they are flip-flopped, and in which case would you use one term versus another? Because it seems to me that you could use, depending on how you feel that it can't, on an individual, both labels could apply, and I'm wondering where you draw the line between those. Thanks a lot. Bye.
Yeah, listen, you can't say with certitude in every single case when someone is flip-flopping for political gain or whether someone's position has actually changed. But there's sort of two things I look at. Number one, when they explain their transition, are they using language that explains why they said the wrong thing, or are they actually explaining to you why their view has changed? Because you will sometimes hear someone change their position on something like LGBT rights as one example, and they won't actually explain why their position was wrong. They will apologize for the things that they said and say that they don't stand by those things anymore. In other words, the things insulting to LGBT people, that's very different than saying, oh, my position was just misinformed and now I understand why the rights rather than the slurs are what I need to change my mind about. Saying I was wrong to use the F word about gay people is very different than saying I didn't used to see gay marriage as equivalent to straight marriage under the law, and now I do. And here's why my position changed. So you've got to be able to explain why that happened, and it has to be credible. So it's a case-by-case basis. Plenty more today on the bonus show. I'm out of time, but make sure you're a member or a patron so that you get the bonus show. We will have much, much more about all of what happened today with Michael Cohen on tomorrow's program.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.